First off, I just want to say that the comments that some of you have been leaving have helped me a lot when it comes to figuring out what I should do. Seriously, I appreciate it so much. I had an idea about what I could do to get my voice back. It was incredibly risky, so I took my time researching all that I could about the woman with the backwards feet. For starters, she's what's called a churl. I won't bore you all by giving a complete folklore lesson about them, so I'll just summarize what I found that's useful. They are shape-shifting, vampiric monsters that often disguise themselves as beautiful women. The only thing that they can't change about their appearances are their backwards feet. Churls primarily attack men, and for the most part, it's difficult to stop them once they've set their sights on someone. However, they can be appeased with the sacrifice of a goat. Honestly, the idea of hurting an innocent animal makes me feel sick, even if it is to save my own life. So my plan is to lure her to Matthew's place. Between the two of us, Matthew will hopefully recognize her as the bigger threat and focus on her. In turn, she'll hopefully be more concerned with the big man with the big gun than with my meek little ass, which will give me time to get the talismans off his door. But just in case, I bought a goat. She's just a small thing that one of the local farmers had for sale. An adorable black pygmy goat that came up to me, making cute little happy goat noises. I told myself not to get attached to her in case I ended up needing to trade her life for mine, which again was only going to happen as an absolute last resort. But I couldn't stop myself from petting her as she stuck her head out the window excitedly, like a puppy on the car ride home. I really, really hope that it wouldn't come down to giving her over to the churl. The farmer had been nice enough to give me a small supply of food to give the goat that should last until the end of the week. I took her home to wait for nightfall, wondering how Siri was going to react to another animal in the house. It ended up being fine. The goat clopped through the house at mock speed, pausing only to occasionally bump me affectionately. Meanwhile, Siri watched intently from the top of the couch, absolutely fascinated with her new roommate. Once the sun set, I brought my new friend with me to find the churl. I figured that it would be best to start where I'd met her the first time, which was the convenience store. I circled the block slowly, letting the goat keep her head out the window, much to the delight of random pedestrians. I figured it was the least I could do for her since I was leading the poor thing into danger. I eventually found the churl sitting on a bench in front of the bar she attacked me at. She was stroking some poor fool's hair, smiling at him, but her attention was ripped away from her unsuspecting prey as my PT Cruiser glided past. The goat even bleated at her when the churl made eye contact with us. When I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw that the churl had abandoned her would-be victim and had begun to pursue us, the flirty smile still on her face. With her on my tail, it was time to pay Matthew a visit. On the drive there, I scratched the goat's back nervously with one hand, trying to keep myself calm. I couldn't believe what I was doing. Not only was this plan incredibly risky, but the thought of condemning another human being to a grisly end wasn't sitting well with me. Sure, Matthew had broken into my house with the intent to put a bullet in my head, but even so, he was still a person. This wasn't like self-defense. This was premeditated. This was a choice that I was making. I know how silly it sounds to agonize over the death of someone who wouldn't think to offer me the same consideration, but I just couldn't ignore the horrible feeling crawling under my skin. But this needed to be done if I ever wanted to get my voice back. I kept checking my rearview mirror, and sure enough, she was still following. What was strange was that even though I was averaging about 50 miles an hour, she was able to keep up by simply walking. Her pace never changed the entire time, yet she was somehow always just barely visible in my taillights. I thought I even saw her blow a kiss to me at one point, but that could have just been my mind playing tricks on me. A chill settled in my stomach when it occurred to me that she may be enjoying the chase. Much to my little goat friend's disappointment, my anxiety won and I rolled up her window. As she bleated at me, I let out a shaky breath, gripping the steering wheel like my life depended on it, as I saw the flags waving on Matthew's front porch. The house was dark with the exception of his porch lights. This was it. I jerked the wheel and bahawed right into Matthew's yard, my tires throwing up dirt as I circled around to the back. The lights inside flicked on, revealing Matthew's massive silhouette. The PT Cruiser skidded in the overgrown grass, but then found traction just as the back door opened. He flung the door open, shotgun in hand and shouting something that I couldn't make out just as the churl sauntered into his yard. She waved at him with a devious smirk on her face before she launched herself at him. He raised his shotgun and shot her right out of the air. Her blood-curdling shriek made me clench my teeth as I circled the PT Cruiser around to the front. The poor little goat was cowering, rolled up into a little ball in the passenger seat. As soon as the cruiser zigzagged next to the porch, I slammed on my brakes, screeching to a halt, hand shooting out next to me to keep the goat from flying off the seat. I threw my door open, slammed it shut, then sprinted towards the porch, flinching as another shot went off, followed by an animalistic shriek that oddly reminded me of broken glass scraping against metal. They were still around the back, too preoccupied with each other for a moment to notice me. Panting, I flung myself onto the porch and at Matthew's front door, seizing the talismans. They were padlocked onto a chain bolted onto the front door. Unfortunately, Matthew hadn't been fucking around when he set the wards up. I whirled around in a panic, noticed a chair on the porch, grabbed it, and clumsily swung it at the front door. The lock stayed strong. I swung again, this time at the door. A crack appeared on its surface. I didn't have to break the lock, just the chain that everything hung from. Then I could run off with the entire thing. Matthew screamed. Then there was the sound of something heavy hitting the ground near me. The churl had tossed him like a sack of potatoes, his shotgun landing just out of his reach. Shit. I desperately hit the door again, hearing another crack. I just needed a little more time. I was so close. Matthew swore at me, then grunted as the churl threw herself on top of him, her teeth clicking an inch from his nose. As they wrestled with each other, I forced myself to keep swinging. One of the bolts had come loose. It was almost off. Suddenly, it got quiet. I turned just in time to see the barrel of the gun pointed at me. I dropped to the ground just as he pulled the trigger, the shot making my ears ring, followed by the tinny sound of metal clattering onto the porch. He'd shot the chain, freeing the talismans. I snatched them and scrambled off the porch on all fours, unable to get my feet under me as I heard Matthew cursing. He was too focused on trying to get another shot at me that the churl was able to jump on his back and sink her teeth into his neck. As he howled, he put the shotgun against her forehead and blew the back of her head clean off. Clutching the talismans in a death grip, I threw myself into the PT Cruiser and peeled out. My back window suddenly exploded. I ducked down as I drove, heart pounding as I heard another shot hit the back of my poor, shitty car. I swerved a little, trying to mess up his aim. There was another shot, but it wasn't near me. The churl must have went for him again. I left them behind, sweating and shaking profusely. My mind was whirling as I tried to get my breath under control, trying desperately to keep up with all that had just happened. It had worked. I had the talismans, but now what? Do I just go home and pray that whoever wins that fight isn't pissed off enough to come after me? That's when it suddenly occurred to me that I couldn't sense Ramy anymore. Did that mean that he didn't know where I was either? That could be useful at some point, just not at that moment. Whoever emerged victorious, I would probably need Ramy's help to defend myself. Quickly, I pulled over, shoved the talismans into my trunk, then got back on the road. I was going to keep them hidden in the PT Cruiser and park at the very end of my driveway so that Ramy would be able to tell when I was home. I was going to pretend like I intended to get rid of them later. I have a feeling he wouldn't be pleased if he knew I was planning on keeping something that could be used against him. I forgot to mention that I did get my front door fixed after the last update. I also had an additional deadbolt installed as well as a sliding lock, just to be safe. I carried the baby goat up my driveway to my house, feeling that weird sixth sense for Ramy getting stronger as I got further and further away from the talismans. I knew that he'd be inside, waiting for me, before I opened the door. Ramy was reclined on my couch, raising a beer bottle to me in greeting, his eyes reflecting green in the low light like a cat's. This was my first time seeing him dressed in regular jeans and a black hoodie, which threw me for a loop. I didn't think he owned anything other than collared shirts and trousers. I guess even ancient tricksters like to grunge down every once in a while. He took a sip of his drink and motioned at the goat with a chuckle. What you got there? As if she knew that he was talking about her, the little goat cradled in my arms bleated. I gently set her down, watching her wander off towards my bedroom. Ramy eyed me, then tilted his head. Is that gray matter in your hair? My hand flew to the crown of my head, and sure enough, there was something squishy, along with pointy shards of what had to be the churl's skull. For the first time, I was glad that I didn't have a voice, because I'm positive that I would have screamed loud enough to break glass. Instead, I gaped like a fish on a hook as I shook my hair out. Some of the brain fragments rolled down the back of my shirt, which, if you're curious, does not feel good. The slime was cold on the back of my neck, squirming as if it were alive. I don't know when Ramy got up, but after I blinked, he was suddenly by my side, brushing the gore off me. After that truly unforgettable experience, he advised me to go somewhere that had a trash can so that he could give me my voice back. Still trembling at the memory of brain wriggling on my skin, I made my way to the kitchen. I located my notepad and asked him if it was possible for him to be gentler this time than he was in the stairwell. He snickered, saying that he'd try his best. Then, Ramy's hands were on my waist, pulling me against his cold chest. Instantly, my face and neck turned bright red. When his lips touched mine, it immediately felt different than it had in the stairwell. That first time it felt more ritualistic, I guess is the best way to put it. A means just to get me to drink his blood. However, this felt more intimate as he took his time easing me into the kiss. He put his hand on my jaw and whispered for me to brace myself. I squeezed my eyes shut and gripped his shoulders hard enough that it probably would have hurt a regular human. There was a sensation of pulling deep within my gut, which traveled slowly up into my chest, as if a massive Burmese python was about to slither its way out of me. I shuddered and instinctively tried to move, but Ramy kept me firmly where I stood. Once the horrible feeling had reached my throat, he released me, letting me dart to the trash can to puke up the substance that had the same color and consistency as tar. He was nice enough to help me back up once I got it all out, guiding me to the sink so that I could rinse what remained of the horrible, black liquid out of my mouth. I'm genuinely amazed that I didn't pass out afterwards, because I remember having tunnel vision as the water swirled on my tongue. Ramy patted my shoulder. Give it a bit before you try to say anything. It'll take a day or two before your voice comes back fully. Headlights shone in my window. Fuck me. I guess Matthew won. The lights got even closer without any suggestion of stopping. Ramy realized what was about to happen before I did, pulling me with him just as Matthew's truck smashed through the side of my house and right into my living room. Matthew ignored the airbags going off as he leapt out, immediately charging at Ramy. Of course he didn't forget his shotgun. He looked awful. Blood trailed from the corner of his mouth and broken nose. A massive jagged wound on his neck made my encounter with the churl seem like a measly love bite by comparison. Ramy pushed me off to the side just as Matthew's shotgun blew a hole in his chest, the force of it throwing him backwards into the front of my refrigerator. I weakly pulled myself along the floor. Knife. I had to get a knife from the counter. Matthew marched up to Ramy, barrel pointed at the djinn's head. Ramy launched himself at Matthew before he could pull the trigger, his shoulder meeting Matthew's stomach, tackling him right into the side of his truck. His fist went through where Matthew's head had been just 1 second before, tearing a massive gash in the truck's carbon fiber body. I reached my knife block, needing to cling onto the counter with the last of my strength to pull myself up. As I floundered, I knocked the knife block over, the clatter of metal barely audible over the fighting in the remains of my living room. Matthew had lost his shotgun to Ramy and was doing his best to keep from getting bludgeoned with his own weapon. He had a good sense of when Ramy was going to go for him, just barely avoiding him each time. Ramy might be inhumanely strong and fast, but Matthew clearly remembered his training in the Marines well. I had a hold of the butcher knife, but I couldn't move very well still. I weakly threw it in Matthew's direction. Just my luck, the handle hit him instead of the blade. However, it broke his concentration long enough for Ramy to kick him to the ground. Before he could get away, Ramy thrust down with the barrel of the shotgun, driving it swiftly between Matthew's teeth with a terrible crack. A sickening gurgle came from Matthew's throat. Ramy drove the gun deeper so that Matthew's jaw now hung down, limp and crooked. After another horrific crack, Matthew's entire body jerked violently. Then went still. I was frozen, unable to look away. Ramy let loose a deep sigh, then turned to me to ask, "Do you have insurance?" My mind was so busy replaying the sound of Matthew's jaw being broken off in a loop that it took me a bit longer than it should have to nod. "Well, if they don't cover it, let me know and I'll give you 3 wishes. He considered for a moment, then continued. "Actually, you know what? Fuck that. I'm gonna go ahead and grant you 3 wishes anyways. I'd say you earned it." As I stood there, still unable to move or process everything that had just happened, Ramy dragged Matthew's body and placed it into the bed of the truck. He said he was going to take Matthew by the lake, intending to pose him to make it look like he'd been driving drunk and gone through the windshield. As with everything else, he was casual about it. He wrote down his address, telling me that I could take Siri and the goat to stay there for the night if I didn't have anywhere else to go. Numbly, I remember that the churl was still out there. Given my research, I doubt that a shotgun would be enough to kill her. So I took up his offer. I gathered my poor, scared animals and packed up some basic necessities for all of us. First thing I did when I got to his apartment was shower off all the churl chunks. Now, I'm camped out on his couch, polishing off a bottle of Absolute while waiting for him to return from arranging Matthew's drunk driving accident. I'm not sure what to do with my 3 wishes yet. With how tired and sore and drunk that I am, I figure that's for future lab rat to figure out. So, any suggestions on what I should name the goat?